And I just want to say, this is Nancy Beninati from the California Department of Justice, and I'm not sharing my video. Now I will. I just wanted to say thank you all for joining. And this is our very first RIPA board subcommittee meeting, doing it via video. And we just appreciate your patience as we work through some of the key kinks. But we have a packed agenda, and I will now just turn it over to Co-Chair Guerrero. Thanks.
Great. Welcome everyone for joining the subcommittee on state and local racial identity profiling policies. We have with us, looks like 52 people, so appreciate the participation this afternoon and the use of new technology. We have an agenda. That agenda, if you don't have it handy, is posted in the chat, and we will walk through that agenda. So to my fellow board members, welcome. And if we could briefly introduce ourselves, that would be great. I'm Andrea Guerrero, co-chair of this subcommittee, and I will pop it to my co-chair, Commissioner Stanley, to just register that he's here, introduce himself.
Hi, it's Warren Stanley. Good afternoon, everyone.
Wonderful. Melanie, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Melanie Ochoa. I'm a senior staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California, and I'm new to the RIPA board and also this subcommittee, so I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. Dave, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Dave Robinson, Kings County Sheriff, representing the California State Sheriff's Association. Good to see everybody.
Sahar?
Hi, this is Sahar Durali. I'm a RIPA board member. I'm currently co-chair of the board with Dave Robinson, Sheriff Robinson, and I work at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County.
Wonderful. I think those are all our board members. We have a new board member with, is that right? Are there other board members that have joined? No. Okay. I do want to welcome Melanie Ochoa. She is a new board member to RIPA, and she's joining us in the new COVID era via video. So good to have you on the RIPA board. Again, I'm Andrea Guerrero. I'm co-chair of this subcommittee. I'm also the executive director of Alliance San Diego, a community organization in San Diego. Okay, we need to now turn to the subcommittee minutes from October 23rd, 2019. If board members could review that, and I invite a motion to approve those minutes.
It's Robinson. I'll make a motion.
Great. Can we get a second?
Commissioner Stanley, I second.
Great. All approve, and I think we're going to need to do a voice vote on this. Melanie, you are not present, so I assume you are an abstain. Is that correct?
Yes, this is Melanie. I'm abstaining.
Great. Sahar?
Yes, I was not present at the previous meeting, so that would be an abstain for me too.
Okay. All right. Well, I join Commissioner Stanley and Sheriff Robinson in approving the minutes from the last meeting as the members of the committee that were present. Now we will turn to an overview of the proposed subcommittee work by the Department of Justice. Take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Allison Elgart, Deputy Attorney General with the AG's office, and thank you all for joining this virtual meeting, our first virtual subcommittee meeting. Since we didn't have our full board meeting earlier this year, it was canceled due to COVID-19. This is our first meeting of board members this year. So we're really excited to kick off 2020 and kick off the 2021 board report. And we're going to be talking as part of this meeting about the policy matrix. That's the next agenda item. We also want to talk to you about a survey that we would like to conduct of the Wave 1 and 2 law enforcement agencies. So we want to discuss that survey with all of you, and we'll do that as part of the discussion of the report contents. And also, get your continued ideas and other input for the report contents. So the matrix is, kind of a continuation of what we did last year with a review of the policies for the Wave 1 agencies. And so this year we have the matrix for the Wave 2 agencies. But otherwise, we want to know from you all what you want to see in the report. And so we're excited to discuss this with you. Otherwise, we don't really have any further updates of the policy section since this is the first meeting. So we're just looking forward to getting everybody's input on the board. Thank you again all for joining.
Great. And I understand you have an update on the review of Wave 2 agencies. You did a survey of their bias-free policing policies, and that's something that you're prepared to share with us today. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm going to turn that over to Dominique.
Wonderful.
I forgot to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominique Alcaraz, and I am also a Deputy Attorney General with the Attorney General's Office. So before we kind of get into board member feedback on the matrix or questions that you might have, I thought it would be helpful to sort of give a background to last year's matrix and what we're doing this year so that everyone is sort of on the same page, as well as members of the public for any feedback they may have during public comment. So last year we did a review, the board did a review of the Wave 1 agencies' bias-free policing policies, and the review was based on the best practices that were included in the 2019 board report. If you look at the meeting packet on page 10, you'll see a much more condensed version that was included in last year's report, the 2020, or I guess this year's report. That gives just a paragraph of what those best practices are that we included in the matrix. And so those included, sorry, did someone have a question? Okay. So at the bottom of that page, you'll see the paragraph begins in the 2019 report. The board recommended various best practices, and it lists each one that we went through the matrix. And so what we did last year was the board reviewed the matrix, and then we provided the matrix to the agencies themselves to give feedback and ensure that all of the information we provided was accurate. Once they provided feedback, those edits were made in order to be included in the board report that was later voted on in December. So this year, we'll be doing Wave 2, which includes 7 agencies: Oakland PD, Sacramento PD, Fresno PD, Orange County Sheriffs, San Jose PD, Long Beach PD, and Sacramento County Sheriffs. And so the matrix itself is on page 9, and pages 6 through 8 include short paragraphs about each agency's policies. So last year, the board wanted any sort of detailed information to be separate from the matrix itself to go over some of the key elements for each best practice. And so what I kind of want to do now is just receive any feedback from the board on what's included here, if they have questions, things they want to have removed or edited, maybe more information that you all would like to see, and any questions just about the matrix and the review itself.
And sorry, before we get to all that, I believe there are a few more board members who have joined. So if any of you are able to be on video, that's great. But if not, if you could just let us know who has joined, that would be great. believe Oscar joined. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good to have you on board, Oscar. Thank you.
Sorry,
And
I'm having technical difficulties.
that's okay. And did Lawanda or Tim get to join? Not seeing them on the list, but there's some numbers that are not identified. Okay. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I'll pop in if I get more notifications of other board members.
Great. So Dominique, you invited us to share comments or questions. You invited specifically board members to share comments or questions about the Wave 2 review chart.
Yes.
Are there any comments or questions from the board?
Sorry, I
this
just
is
got here, so I'm having trouble finding the chart.
Yeah, so the chart is in the materials that were in the agenda, or if you look at the chat, there's also a link. You can click through on the link for the meeting materials, and the chart that we're looking at is on page 9 of those materials. Did I hear another voice with a question or a comment?
Yeah, this is Melanie. Hi. I'm not sure if this is something that was already discussed on the subcommittee in previous years, but one thing I thought might be interesting if it's possible or useful to know is how kind of bias-free policing concepts are incorporated into other types of policies. So for instance, in terms of thinking about training, I think bias could be, or anti-bias training could be very useful to how officers assess threats or assess, make decisions in terms of de-escalation, et cetera. And I think in talking to Post last year in the training subcommittee, I believe they talked about how anti-bias was incorporated into those different trainings already, and also principled policing principles. I think I'm not using the correct term, but it's also incorporated into different trainings as well, not just a standalone unit. And so I think that might be useful to know whether there's anti-bias considerations factored into like use of force policies for the different agencies or other places that we think it could be valuable to be thinking about these things and operationalizing them. That's one thought. And then another possible, I guess this is not necessarily to the matrix that currently exists, but thinking about any way to measure compliance with the RIPA policies. So I believe it's known kind of the number of errors for like incorrectly including like person identifying information or other types of errors that may be coming from the agency or failure to comply with different RIPA-based policies. So I think that might be useful to be tracking to kind of know if and where any of these issues are arising, and maybe they also might impact how users view the data if there's certain kinds of errors that we're seeing with different agencies.
That's great. Thank you for that, Melanie. I don't know if Dominique or anyone from DOJ wants to respond to that or reflect on that.
I can briefly respond to the first one. At least in my recollection, and maybe I can go back to other meeting notes from this subcommittee, but I don't recall sort of this consideration about how anti-bias plays into other trainings or, other policies that agencies have. But in last year's review and in this year, when we do sort of look for the policies or ask for them, we do ask if there is a standalone policy or if there are any other policies where something of this nature is incorporated into. And from the Wave 2 agencies themselves, I believe Oakland PD's policy sort of touches on other areas like stops and how anti-bias can go into that. But I'm not sure that we haven't I don't remember if we've talked about it as making it sort of a separate section in the matrix or something separate that we discuss.
Great. And in terms of compliance with RIPA policies, I know that we don't have too many agencies online yet. And I know that the DOJ is taking great care to work with agencies to make sure that they are troubleshooting the data issues. And Melanie, your question may be more around, how hard agencies are trying, or should we be concerned about any lack of compliance with the data submissions in particular? And I'd love to hear from DOJ if that's a concern at this juncture. Do we have any agencies who for whom data submission is presenting significant problems, or where the integrity of the data is something that we should be monitoring more? I know we've spent a lot of time talking about it in the last year, so just wondering where we're at in monitoring the integrity of the data.
Erin or Audra, would one of you want to speak to that issue? Or Kevin, anyone from Research Center or CSP? You may be muted if anyone is speaking.
Audra should be able to.
Audra, can you hear us, and are you able to speak? You are off mute.
Erin and Audra should be able to speak.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Now we can, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not Erin or Audra. This is Tim. Finally figured out how to.
Okay, Tim has joined us. Great.
Hey, Tim.
Welcome, Tim.
Sorry, Andrea.
You didn't sound like Erin or Audra.
Maybe we can move on to other questions while we're waiting to see if DOJ can respond. Melanie, I know you were tracking on RIPA activities before you joined us as a board member, but and I don't know for how long and at what meetings, but we did spend a significant amount of time last year in 2019 on the issue of data integrity, and I feel like we really hit that head on, and your question is a good one about compliance with RIPA policies, but I think we addressed it more through the data submission, data integrity angle, and DOJ has really taken it upon itself to make sure that data is of high integrity. So maybe we can hear from DOJ on that later. But are there other questions or concerns about the policy review?
I guess one just follow up on that. I was at a lot of those meetings, and I think DOJ has done a lot of work in trying to make sure that the data is clean, and particularly around, I think, removing personally identifiable information. But I think it might be useful to know just where the problems are coming from in terms of the agencies, because maybe it'd be useful for people to be advocating at the agencies to do a better job and remove some of this work from DOJ to clean it on the back end even. So it might be just in terms of the data the issues they're already having to work with, kind of where are those coming from, and keeping tabs on that.
Yeah, good point. And I'm not sure that this is the right subcommittee to be thinking about that issue, because I think we haven't looked at that issue through a policy lens. We've looked at that more through the stop data lens, and there's a different subcommittee for that work. And I think that's probably the better place. That's where we have really focused on the issue of data integrity. So, but we'll wait to hear from DOJ on that. As board members are thinking about other questions that they might have in that review, Dominique, I did want to just verify that that this chart and the paragraphs that you've written up is going to be sent to the Wave 2 agencies for verification and correction. Is that right?
Yes, we plan to send it to them in the coming weeks after this meeting.
Okay, great. And then my follow-up question is, are we doing anything or can we do anything to query Wave 1 agencies to see if anything has changed? I know oftentimes, agencies update their policies 1 year to the next, and things have changed where there might be an X for not meeting our desired standard. There might be a check. Are we circling back with Wave 1 agencies?
We haven't done that ourselves. If that's something that the board would like to do, I don't see why not, since there's still a small number of them. But
right.
If that's what you all would like, I can certainly reach out to them as well, or do research online based on the matrix last time around.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So I would love to hear from other board members about that question or any other question you have.
This is Sahar. So I actually joined this committee pretty late last year, and I don't think I've been in any of the meetings, but I'm looking at the chart now and on page 9, and I'm wondering, I know on the next page you talk about remedial action and how that should be outlined. I'm very curious to see if that can be another data point. I don't know if that ship has sailed now since I haven't been at your meeting, but the subcommittee's meetings rather, but I would be very curious to see what kind of remedial action is contemplated by these different agencies when these policies are violated, because there's a ton of research that absent accountability, a standalone policy doesn't produce results.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Sorry, I just want to clarify what it is that you're asking. To sort of know what happens in the process if the policy is violated, what happens next? What does an agency do?
Yeah, because it has supervisory review, but that's very unclear to me, and I think that could mean so many different things. It could just mean a supervisor looks at it. It could mean a supervisor actually takes action based on it. It could mean discipline, and I think those are interesting data points. Again, I'm not sure where you are at in this process because I haven't been at previous meetings, but I do think that would be interesting data to have.
And is that something that you think you would want more fleshed out in, say, the short paragraphs for each agency? Since, some of these have check marks and others have X's under the supervisory review section, would you want sort of more detail on the ones with a check mark to include how they do that?
Yeah, that would be great. If that's not already there, that would be great.
Okay.
And why isn't there supervisor review in 5 of the agencies, or 4 or 5 of them?
That is a great question, and maybe it's something that is not included in this specific policy, but they have somewhere else. But that's definitely, if that is something that the board is interested in looking at more thoroughly when we send these to the Wave 2 agencies, we can ask specifically about that feature. If there is another policy, that they can provide it to us.
This is Tim. I had a question.
Go for it, Tim.
Hi, thanks, Andrea. Is there anything, and how close are we at this point, that would preclude the board from saying these are based upon this data that we have, Wave 1 data that we have, and a lot of other research and expertise on the board and other places? Is there anything that precludes us from starting to put into reports, these are our recommended model policies, and in fact, here's a spreadsheet with check marks that shows which agencies are following those policies, or at least have those policies in place, and which don't? And I think we've talked about a number of policies potentially and are aware of them that probably no agencies in California, or maybe 1 or 2 have, but to begin to actually be more proactive in saying, these are the policies that every agency in California should have, and then for the public in those jurisdictions to be able to see easily which policies does their agency have in place and which don't they.
So Tim, we have provided model policy language, and so what you're suggesting, just so I get clarity, is that we more proactively measure agencies against the particulars of the model policies. Is that what,
Yeah,
what you're
I
saying?
think we
We
yeah,
put them on,
I
we
know
put
that
agencies on notice of what we think are best practices, and now we want to measure against those best practices.
yeah, and I'm thinking yes, and I know we have in some areas, but yeah, almost a checklist, right? If you could imagine, a big chart that has the names of the policies as we're recommending across one axis and the agencies across the other, and you could see a check mark or not, see if your agency has that policy in place.
So Dominique, is that making sense to you? Or I'm thinking, for example, model policy language for supervisory review. We have there on page 10 of the documents, and we have 3 bullets there with some sub bullets. And so, Tim, is your idea that we would create columns for each of those bullets? Like we would get down to that detail. So it's not just a check on supervisory review, but on these subpoints.
I haven't thought about it that far. I think you'd have to sort of look at it and see, from my perspective, it's to, both point out and encourage adoption of the model policies, but in particular to, so if I'm a resident of Oakland, I can see which policies OPD has in place and which they don't. As far as sort of how micro to go, I think it depends on, because there are so many different areas that the board has covered. So it would depend if going really micro makes it less user-friendly or understandable, right? But it's, it's sort of, are you getting close? Is an agency getting close to sort of, a good seal of approval or not?
Uh-huh.
And it allows the public and and other policymakers within a jurisdiction to quickly identify what their agency does and does not have in place. Then you guys are also raising a whole other set of questions, which is, well, having the policy in place is one thing, actually doing something about it is another. But for now, just sort of a snapshot, which would allow me as a resident of a certain jurisdiction to advocate for those things that my agency does not have in place, and also maybe give me some clear areas or understanding of where I might want to be pushing in terms of asking questions about not just do you have the policy in place, but is it being enforced? Is it being used? Is it being effective?
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm trying to think about how to make this enormous body of work that this board and the agencies are doing sort of publicly understandable and friendly in terms of adoption of model policies. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, which was, I'm not sure. I think we'd have to see it and see if under every policy there were several more detailed bullets, whether it would become overwhelming to understand. If it didn't, I think it's great to include the sub-issues.
Yeah, and so maybe building on or pulling together what both you and Sahar have suggested, maybe more detail about each of these these columns or categories. And maybe DOJ could give some thought as to how that could best be accomplished through the narrative that is provided for each agency, or through a chart-like image.
Okay. I just want to clarify, because I feel like I was hearing two sort of separate things between you and Tim. I know you, Andrea, sorry, you can't see who I'm pointing to on my screen. We're talking about the specific language, model policy language that was included by the board last year in last year's report. That was one piece, comparing whether they have this kind of language, these specific terms in their policies. And it sounded like Tim was saying a whole model policy for something specific like supervisory review, or component on accountability. And I feel like if we were doing the Tim's version, we would need some sort of model policy in order to do that, to compare. And I don't know if the board is there yet, although we do have sort of language that has been laid out before. And it sounds like the conclusion is including more detail in the narrative about some of these portions would maybe bring a compromise of, we don't have model policies at this time to compare each agency to. And it may be, if we went to the lower level of specific language, would not necessarily fit into a chart that would be a user-friendly chart, easily readable. And so right now it sounds like more information in the narratives would be helpful.
I welcome other board members' thoughts on this. Yeah, so Dominique, and go ahead, Melanie.
I'll just say I'm not sure where we would stand in terms of, in all of those areas, adopting a model policy, but one place where I do think that it may be useful to have it is in addressing how complaints should be analyzed or evaluated, because I know one thing that we see, and I think it's reflected in the last report as well, is that these complaints, even if there is a possible way in which officers who exhibit bias actually are held accountable, theoretically, these complaints are almost never substantiated or found to be are sustained in practice, and it may be a matter of the way in which the agencies are evaluating complaints on this issue. So that, if we could come at least with a best practices on that piece, I think that would be incredibly useful in terms of actually kind of getting towards the holding officers accountable element.
I'd love to hear from law enforcement on the subcommittee. Commissioner Stanley or Sheriff Robinson, do you have any thoughts or reflections at this time?
Hi, Andrea. Dave Robinson. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it at this point. I just think the data, we're going now into our second year of data, and so I'm just curious to see kind of how this data plays out. And so as far as the policies go, and handling those and looking at, the complaint process, it's going to be challenging for there to be a uniform one across the board that says how the complaint would be handled individually by each agency. A lot of that is staff intensive, so it depends on how big of an agency it is, how many people are assigned to it, and things like that. So at this point, I think a lot of the suggestions are reasonable suggestions and things to look at. I just think that this initial charge is we're still kind of digesting all the data and looking at all the data. And so when we see more of this data from 2019 now, I think that's going to be helpful and hopefully drive some of these conversations.
Thanks. Commissioner Stanley, do you have any reflections?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Similar to what Dave said, when you go department by department and how they evaluate these is very different. We hope, and when I'm talking about evaluating them, the complaints, and hope that all agencies are evaluating them and making a decision based on the evidence that they come up with, during these investigations, and based on whether it's sustained or unfounded or undetermined, based on the evidence that they have. So I don't know if we could come up with a one kind of size fits all, but that's my thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I would just reflect on, the importance of setting out expectations and then measuring people against them. And if we were going to want to be measuring or monitoring law enforcement on any particular metrics, we would want to set the clear expectation of that in a report that we put out. And so we've done some of that through the model policy language already. And so, the question is whether we take a one step further and package it all together or add components to what that model policy should be. And then, say that this is our expectation as a RIPA board. I think those are some of the steps that we would need to take if we were going to then measure law enforcement against them. So right now we're measuring sort of at a 50,000 foot level, whether somebody has supervisory review or somebody has accountability mechanisms. But the opportunity is to go, one level deeper to understand what supervisory review is, what our expectation is around that. And accountability is just a huge, huge issue, right? We've identified it for the last several years as the big one, if we can figure that out. So welcome any other comments about that, about how we can deepen the expectations and also the monitoring and observation and understanding of what's going on at our law enforcement agencies. So consider a food for thought right now, DOJ. In the interest of time, I want to move on. Are there other questions, comments, reflections on what Dominique has shared or what other board members have brought up? Okay. I do want to ask, I want to just note that specifically what we were looking at in this review was bias-free policing or bias-free policies. I know we've been getting some questions about use of force and other things, just to remind folks that that's what we had been looking at in our review. And there's certainly other things about policing that need monitoring, but that was our specific focus in the review that DOJ did. We are in a new moment. We're in the era of COVID, and we now have new policies that we didn't anticipate, and those are COVID enforcement policies. And I know that there's been concern locally about how those policies are interplaying with potential bias in policing. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we're going to be able to see what that looks like through the data that we're already collecting, or if that's a policy consideration that when we're talking to Wave 2 agencies and possibly Wave 1 agencies that we should be querying about the interaction of their bias-free policies with their COVID enforcement policies. I welcome any thoughts around that. And from law enforcement, I specifically am interested in knowing if you all are including as a point of data in your stops COVID enforcement.
Hi, this is Commissioner Stanley. We are not, because from day one it's always been educational. Trying to get people to to socially distance, wear their masks, and then especially at the first part, at the very beginning, the shelter in place, only essential travel. So for us, it's been purely educational.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Andrea, Dave Robinson. Yeah, I'll echo the commissioner's comment. We've done zero actual enforcement on this, and I know there's obviously on social media and stuff we've seen a few examples up and down the state where there has been some enforcement by agencies but no, we've done the educational thing as well, where we just tried to educate people on what was going on, and then as restrictions have been lifted, the gray area became so large that we literally stopped even doing any kind of response to any call for service, because quite frankly, we had a lot of people calling in that were trying to turn in their neighbor for having 11 people at their house and things like that. And so we just, through our dispatch center, we just told them that just to take the call in as information, and then we wouldn't even send a deputy out to the call regardless of who it was or what it was about, because it just became such a gray area. There's really nothing to enforce any longer. And I think a lot of agencies in California have kind of done the same thing. Some of the examples that we've seen on social media, just some of the things that I've heard from law enforcement were those egregious examples where people had been given dozens upon dozens of warning and educational opportunities and still chose to go against those. But I don't know that anyone's tracking those separately. So, could it be something that is included in there? Sure. I don't think that would be too difficult to do. I just don't know where you stop. It's COVID this year. It was SARS. It was H1N1. What's it going to be, next year? When it comes to that, I really think the stop is the stop, based on the circumstances. But you should be able to track, if you're enforcing a government code section, that section itself, could definitely be tracked and drawn from. I do agree with your comments. It's definitely changed the game this year, because I know that we're seeing a drastic drop in self-initiated activity, rightfully so, because people didn't want to expose themselves and expose their families. And so I think our data coming in next year is going to be drastically different, for at least 2.5 months. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Commissioner Stanley, and Dave, you bring up a good point, because you're going to see a drop in the data for a lot of reasons, for less self-initiation, but we also had fewer people driving. Traffic volume was down tremendously because you had fewer people on the road, so fewer stops, were being made. So that'll be part of the data also. Just the number of people that were out there on the road was much, much less. So there were fewer stops being made, and officers just doing more in-view patrol, just making sure traffic was moving, so medical supplies and other supplies could get delivered and things of that nature. And then you had a lot of law enforcement agencies, and I'll speak for us, because we're a statewide agency, and the governor is coordinating the state's response to COVID. We had a number of our officers pulled away to do other duties related to COVID. So there were at times out there we had fewer people on the road because they were handling COVID-19 duties, and in other words, trying to move the state along so we could drive the curve down.
Yeah, so Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that you raise an interesting point, and I think there's an opportunity to look at use of force around COVID and the racial profiling and bias-free police policies around that, because we've seen, I mean, I don't know if I've seen anything from California, but differences in how restrictions are enforced, and I don't know how long this virus is going to be with us, but I think it could be an interesting thing to look at. Making recommendations. I don't know if that's too specific or we should make recommendations about use of force to begin with, but it's definitely something that's been very striking and at the top of the news cycle.
Yeah, it seems like, as we think about the content for the report this next year, and, we're still in May, right? So we have time to think about what we can add to be relevant. It seems like we should give consideration to some space around this virus enforcement. Dave raised a good point that it's COVID today, but it's could very well be something else tomorrow, right? And how do we hold space in our report for these sorts of things? Maybe not even narrowing it down to COVID, right? Because we're anticipating that this is going to be our new normal. And welcome thoughts around that and other content that the report should have. We've talked about the chart. We've talked about the review and what we could consider getting from another round of outreach from law enforcement. What are your thoughts about content for the report on policy chapter? Oscar, you look poised to speak.
I'm just concerned. I was scrolling down and looking at the rest of the parts. I mean, that there isn't supervisory review of any of these policies. What kind of message are we putting out? Hey, with a report that has lack of.
I can't really hear you that well, Oscar.
Sorry. Is that better?
A little bit. You might need to get a little closer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
better.
I'm just concerned that there isn't any supervisory review in so many of these large agencies. I mean, that people are being trained in allegedly being trained in what they're supposed to do with encounters in the community and whether or not complaints are filed, and then there's no supervisor that looks at what's being done. What's the point? If you're not gonna have somebody that oversees when complaints are made and when a policy's been violated, what's the point of having it? Otherwise, you're just letting the cops be rogue in regard to how they respond to these confrontations. So I think it's really troubling that we've gotten so many responses back from agencies that don't have supervisor review of what their policies are.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions? Yeah. Do you have any suggestions of what this committee should do or what DOJ should be doing?
DOJ should be recommending that there's supervisory review of all of the policies, whether or not they're being violated.
So, Dominique, is it possible to reach out specifically around that question and get an answer to that question from the Wave 2 agencies? Why is this an X?
It's even in the Wave 1 agency.
And yeah, all of Wave 1 and Wave 2 agencies where there's an X, really digging into that. I mean, some of that you might be able to determine just by looking at the policy, your review of the policy, but I think a question to the agencies might be warranted.
Okay.
And a request for explanation because of the concerns that Oscar has raised.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you, Oscar. Other
Sure.
content?
And Andrea, I just wanted to add that we had another sort of presentation from DOJ about potential board for information. So I don't know if you want Anna to come on now and explain it, or if at some point you want to call her in. But thank you for your feedback on the matrix.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't clear from the agenda that there was more DOJ presentation. Let's have more DOJ presentation.
No problem.
Hi, Allison. Would you like to share the draft outline report?
Sure. I can just call all of your attention to the outline that was on the last 2 pages of the packet that's available, that link on the website. Since we did not get to review the outline with the board at the first board meeting of the year, that didn't happen. We just wanted to share the outline with all of you. We'll be sharing it with all the subcommittees. Right now for the policies, it's really, as we have discussed, which is an overview of the board's charge and the review of the bias-free policing. So, right now, it's very general, obviously, in terms of what you want to include. So I just want to make the point that there is room to add in whatever the board decides should be part of the outline, but I just wanted to call all of your attention to that line itself. And you can feel free to get us any comments about that, and we'll be bringing that up. There may be more of a discussion about that because the policy content has been somewhat developed already from the past, but there may be in other subcommittees even more discussion about that point. But I do want to, because one of the issues that has come up a lot in the policy subcommittee and in other subcommittees is the issue of funding to make some of these changes. So Anna is going to give an update. Anna's going to give an update about that, and also the survey, which was another potential for contents. And so, Anna, I'll turn it over to you to just lead off the discussion on those, since that may be something that the subcommittee wants to consider for the content.
Great, thank you all. I'll briefly share an update on LEA reimbursements, because I know that we've received a lot of questions about that from board members and from LEAs. Section 5 of AB 953 states that if the Commission on State Mandates determines that this act contains costs mandated by the state, reimbursement to local agencies and school districts for these costs shall be made, pursuant to Part 7 of Division 4 of Title II of the Government Code. However, before the reimbursement process is established, the Commission on State Mandates must process test claims. On March 12th, the Commission issued a proposed decision on the test claim Racial and Identity Profiling 18 TC02. On May 22nd, the Commission partially approved the test claim. Proposed modifications and comments may be filed on the draft expedited parameters and guidelines by June 12th. Detailed documents related to the test claim are available on the Commission's website, and I can share a link to the website in the chat. And for people calling in, I'm going to read that out. It's csm.ca.gov/matters/18-TC-02.php. All right. That's just a quick update for those who are interested in the reimbursement process. About the survey, the Civil Rights Enforcement Section, RIPA team, and the Research Center have begun to develop a survey to better understand the resources and activities that reporting agencies are engaging to advance the goals of RIPA. The idea is to include Wave 1 and waive 2 agencies in a full survey, and waive 3 agencies in the portion of the survey that isn't related to data analysis. We believe that valuable feedback will be provided through the survey and suggest that the committee consider including this LEA feedback in the board report. So I have, we've developed 10 potential survey questions. To give you an idea, I want to read some of those questions. What, if any, actions has your agency taken in response to the bias-free policing policy model language provided in the RIPA Board 2020 annual report? How has your agency incorporated the findings and recommendations included in the RIPA Board's annual reports in roll call training or academy courses? If your agency has a civilian review or community advisory board, has that body discussed the findings and recommendations of the reports? What, if any, actions has your agency taken in response to the best practices recommendations regarding civilian complaint procedures and forms provided in the RIPA Board 2020 annual report? What, if any, other actions has your agency taken in response to the recommendations in the RIPA Board's annual reports? Those are followed by 4 questions about data analysis that are more relevant to the work of the Stop Data Subcommittee. And lastly, please provide any other comments you believe would be useful in understanding the resources and activities that your agency is engaging to advance the goals of RIPA. Yeah. We wanted to share that with the board. We believe that that will provide valuable feedback on how the agencies are acting on the work that the board has produced.
Thank you. Are you, is that it for your presentation? Yes. Okay. Does DOJ have more to add to that? Okay. So would this survey that you're developing that will go to Wave 1 and Wave 2 agencies then be a place that we could contribute content? For example, around this issue of accountability and supervisory review, which we feel is very important. Would that be a place for that, for a question around that, a deeper question around that? DOJ? That's the question I'm posing to you.
This is Allison. I think we can, I think that may be better, the better avenue for that may be directly talking with them about their specific policies and the supervisory review. And in part because the survey is really focused on how are they using the data and recommendations and findings of the report itself and what they're doing with that. Because one of the big questions that came up last year at the board meetings was, what does this look like in practice? You know, we can talk about model policies, we can talk about, you know, complaint form language or model policy language, but how are the law enforcement agencies actually using the RIPA report or the recommendations of the board in their own agencies? And so, you know, we can make supervisory review an aspect of that if the board would like, but we can also address that directly with them, you know, in following up on the matrix itself. And this was really, you know, the idea from this came from the board's questions and concerns about, you know, are they actually using the report? How can we put all of these ideas into practice? You know, and how do we make this, how do we turn this, how do we make it count? How do we turn the analyses and reviews and recommendations into something that the agencies are actually using? And so that was really the impetus for the survey, which the hope was then that if the board was interested in making the survey results part of the policy section of what are they doing with the policies? Are they reading the policies, the language and the report, and then using it to change their own policies? Do they have a committee about that? The same with the data. one of the questions, again, that has come up is funding. And so one of our questions for the agencies was, how are you, are you doing your own analysis? If not, are you partnering with others? So it's really, the aim, I think, is to learn from them about how they're turning the report and the recommendations into practice.
Andrea,
Thanks,
would you,
Allison.
I was going to say, would you like to do a separate survey maybe for next year? I mean, it's just, so Allison's correct, and I think it really came from a suggestion that Tim made at the last meeting about sort of, we have the data, we've been working on these policies, but how are they, what is really the real world impacts? And I think one of the way the questions are framed is that the way Allison said, to find out what law enforcement finds very useful in terms of moving forward. And so we wanted to try to use this to craft, what we're going to be doing for policies. How are we presenting our reports in the future? And I would like to keep it on a smaller scale right now. We have 10 questions, but I think certainly we could for next year. And accountability is I agree, it's a huge issue, especially with respect to how is law enforcement using the stop data in a way that looks at accountability from the officer level, like how are sergeants looking at this, how are not just the big picture as to how departments are analyzing their data, but are they using it during roll call training? Are they how are they reinforcing this on a regular basis? And I don't think we were going to talk about this today, Allison, but we are also developing a training with Post, and we are focusing, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that with the Post subcommittee tomorrow. But part of that will also address accountability. So part of that presentation is going to focus on that kind of accountability issue. So it may not be getting addressed directly in this subcommittee this year, but another subcommittee is going to be looking at that in a different way.
Thanks. I think that's helpful. So, and I think these questions are going to be fruitful, right? And but they're really process-based. They're really about how are you changing the way you do business in your policing to incorporate this data. And I think that's super valuable. And I think there's a tremendous need to figure out not only how the processes are changing, but what the outcome is, right? And that's the missing component here. And I don't know if that can be folded in as a question here, or if that is a question that we do as part of our direct follow-up on the matrix. But the accountability question comes down to, did you hold somebody accountable? And I'm not sure how we get at the outcome on that, whether that's a reporting out on that's in some part the complaint process. We get some outcome-based data on that, but even short of a complaint, it goes to the question of supervisory review, and without getting into the personnel issues, what were the outcomes of your accountability process? What did it yield? And that seems to be the question we never get to. So I'm wondering if this is the time, if this is the year that we can begin to get answers to that question. I open it up to the board, and then we should open it up to the public shortly here. For the board members, Are there thoughts on this particular question on the survey or on more generally on the content in the report?
Nancy, was there any time for them to respond specifically to the survey? Were they given a deadline?
Yeah, we don't have a timeline right now. If you want to take a look at it, we can send it to you.
Just curious as to should we be expecting some kind of response from law enforcement by a particular week?
I think, our goal would be to get the survey out to them fairly soon, like within the next couple of weeks, and then try to get responses from them before the September board meeting, ideally. Of course, there's always follow-up, and, we may not hear from all of them, but the hope would be, giving them, let's say, it is a short, that's part of the goal of keeping it to 10 questions. It's a 10-question survey, so giving them 30 days to respond and then allowing some time for following up with them to see if they can respond, et cetera. And so the hope would be to have some information before the next full board meeting, and certainly in the next subcommittee meetings that we could share with all of you.
I have a question because I looked at the proposed outline for the board's report, and this section on this particular subcommittee is pretty anemic, but I know that you guys are just developing it, right? That's not a judgment at all. I just haven't been part of this committee, so if we're not doing, if we're not digging deeper on some of these questions, then what are we focusing on for the report this year? And you might have discussed this, but I don't know.
I think the idea was to use this survey as maybe a centerpiece for discussion, and how we use it is is to be determined. But the questions are they're just very basic about what parts of the report do you, as Anna was reading, like what parts of the report do you use? How are you using it? It's really it's kind of basic, and then to try to do some kind of like almost like I don't know if it's like a literature review or putting it all together. And as Allison said, we were trying to have something put together for the next board meeting, or even if you all decide to do another subcommittee meeting before the board meeting. Because believe it or not, we were just talking, we're going to have to notice the board meeting in like 5 weeks for September. Like we have to notice it by, I think, July 1st. So that's like, almost a month away. So, time seems like it's far away, but it's quite short. But so the hope was to use that survey and really kind of flesh those ideas out and use kind of like, not like almost like a self-critique, but also as a way for us to know that is a good way to move going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. So given that the survey is a centerpiece and recognizing the realities of this year in which we're all working remotely and we're in the midst of a pandemic public health crisis, I can appreciate that we need to be very moderated in what we can expect to do this year. But I do, and I appreciate the survey as a centerpiece, but it really has to provide meaningful information. And I think the questions that you laid out are good ones. I do think that strengthens the argument for incorporating into the survey a more pointed question about accountability. Because this issue of accountability is one that continues to come up at our meetings. I'm happy to, maybe we can give some thought to this before the full board meeting, so we can have something to chew on there. But I think, like, if there's one thing we could do to move the ball forward, it would be to move the accountability ball forward.
I would agree with that, especially to flesh out this portion of the report. And also that's been the feedback we've been getting from the public, members of, the broader community too. If we could add a question or two, I think that would be great, especially around the supervisory review issues.
Yeah, we can definitely strengthen that. I can't find mine right this second, but I'm pretty sure there is an accountability leaning question, and we can just strengthen it. And Anna, I think I'm right. I think that there is a question about, like, how are you using the data, but I think we can add a subpart to that question about specifically with respect to accountability.
Right, I'm looking at the data analysis questions.
There is a question on civilian reviewer community advisory board and how they are discussing the report and recommendations. So obviously that's not the whole piece, but that is one aspect of accountability, though not every agency might have one. But that's part of, that's one of the questions. So we can certainly, and Anna, sorry, you were going to say something too. Anna, are you there? Were you going to say something too?
I'm jumping across different
Okay.
applications here. The data analysis questions are around the categories that the LEA analyzes, benchmark comparisons, with whom their findings are shared, and external resources that the agency engages for analysis.
Yeah,
so we can certainly.
Those are related, but those aren't on point.
I agree. Yeah. So I could also be getting the post thing mixed up with this thing, but I definitely agree that that's a great point, and we will for sure build that in.
Okay, great. So we'll look for a pointed question on accountability to move the ball forward that we can chew on as a full board, which is our next time that we will be together. Great. So before I turn it over for public comment, there's one more call for board members to contribute to thoughts on content.
Oh, can someone clarify, Dominique, are you surveying those agencies identified in that outline separately? Did I understand that correctly? From this broader DOJ survey on the RIPA board, what they're doing with RIPA board data?
Yes, that's right. So I reach out to them directly, and the survey is going to go out. Someone put us on.
Oh, Lord.
Not sure who.
Oh, no. Okay. Just a reminder to keep yourself on mute, including the person who put us on hold. Thank you.
Okay. So maybe we can flesh out Dominique's survey too.
Mm-hmm. Both.
Specific question. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Yes, I think that was something I took away, that I will be asking more specific questions on the supervisory review portion for the policies.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Good. Any other comments that board members want to make? No? Okay. All right. I would like to open up for public comment. And DOJ, is this something that that you can help facilitate. We have chats. I understand people can speak via phone and possibly via video. Is that correct, DOJ?
Yes. So I'm going to unmute everyone. And we're going to first take a roll from those on the phone, if they would like to just say their name and who they are, and then we'll give everybody will get their couple of minutes.
Okay, so we're going to start with people on the phone. If you are on the phone, first of all, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And you would like to make a comment. If you're on the phone and you would like to make a comment, please speak up and identify yourself.
This is Rwanda, board member, and I don't have a comment.
Okay, nice to know you joined us. Thank you. Members of the public on the phone? Okay, hearing none, we'll turn to video. Karen Glover, do you have a comment?
Hi.
Mod, because this work is really grounded in the recency of this day death. So the discussion that y'all were having about the discussion that y'all were having, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Yep.
Yes, so just a reminder, if you're not speaking, please go on mute.
Please go on mute.
Karen, you're only on a single sound source, correct?
Yes.
You're only on computer audio, not on computer and phone? Okay, great. Proceed.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really heartened to hear this discussion today. So part of I think, this discussion about accountability that y'all are having today, part of the rub is that it is unclear to me and perhaps in the processing here of whether the LEAs have to do analysis of the data. I don't see that as being a mandate. They are encouraged to do it. There's language about them actually doing analysis of the data, which is where you get to the point of being able to look at accountability issues. And until that is really cleared up, the accountability goal is going to be limited. And I'll just direct you to the page 9, wave 2 agency from the report. 5 of the 6 on page 9 don't have a component on data analysis, right? And I think that applies to wave 1 as well. They don't talk about doing data analysis, and until there's that connection with them actually doing the data analysis or having some serious way to do the analysis, that accountability is going to be hard to reach. I'll also point out there was a discussion about the policies talking about supervisory review. I just noted on a quick glance here that a few of the agencies that do not have supervisory review in their policies are Lexipol policies. If you remember that earlier discussion about the private corporation, it's noted in your footnotes here. Lexipol, right? This organization that lots of law enforcement agencies rely on to generate their policies doesn't have supervisory review in their own policies, right? That's one of the cautions of using Lexipol. I'll also point out that I would argue that there can be a case made that agencies that don't go to Lexipol for their policies have maybe a greater buy-in into the policies that they are creating on their own, as opposed to going and get a template policy. The comments again towards the end about accountability, it is an issue of the data being analyzed and also what happens to that data being analyzed. I'd also like to make two final or three final points. There was an excellent point by Oscar, if I can use first names here, that the direct supervisor, there's research showing us that the direct line supervisor in policing is one of the most influential points of accountability. And it got to the points that y'all are bringing up about a lack of supervisory review, and his point specifically went there. I also would like to point out Sahar's point about remediation and those policies not really saying anything about what actually happens in accountability processes, right? And remediation, that's actually a legal term that's being used here. That's actually treatment, kind of education, as opposed to being more punitive, which might have a greater impact here. And then the final thing is that, just FYI, San Diego, where I'm from, I'm in Oceanside here, and San Diego Police Department did a traffic stop data collection over the last few years here. Many of you are familiar with that. The report itself was not a great report, but just FYI, in case you are interested in this, there's now starting to roll out some published research on interviews of police officers in the San Diego Police Department. And I'm not, blowing any covers here. It's in the published report. And that interview data is really interesting because on some level, to your work here, they're talking about the officers not really buying into the idea of data collection, which is an important point. Thank you for your work.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate your comment. I see on video one other member of the public, and that's Richard Helt. Richard, would you like to make a comment?
Yes.
Hilton, sorry.
I find it so interesting that we have speaking about policies when, can you hear me?
Yes.
When we ought to be speaking about performance. And if we were to look at performance, we would see it sadly wanting. For example, the Reaper Board report clearly states massive disparities between what the law enforcement agencies would claim as compared to what they do. Yet we spend time speaking about policies. They fail to meet up to their policies. And there should be the word remediation of that failure. For example, again, if you were to ask about use of force and you were to examine data, it would show that the San Diego Police Department uses dogs on blacks 10 times as often as they do on whites. They're worse in Los Angeles. But we are speaking about policies. I dare say that were we in Minnesota, they would have policies against knees on necks. Let us speak about performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. Appreciate your comments. Let's see, Karen would like to add one more comment. Proceed.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if y'all have had any discussion about, since this data collection and the work of the RIPA board is fairly new, to getting a baseline, to use that term, of where our agencies are now with these issues, like how many complaints do they have, what is any kind of existing data they have about their practices with racial profiling, identity profiling, where is it now? And then in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, or whatever, look and see if these policy changes, if this work of the RIPA board has changed things. I just thought that would, I was interested in that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. That's good to note. I see another member of the public. If you're interested in speaking, please speak up and introduce yourself. You are identified as guest on the video. We can't hear you very well. Could you get closer to your microphone?
Sure. AB 392, which went into effect January 1st, 2020, mandates new standards for use of deadly force. How is this RIPA subcommittee addressing the new mandate in its, number one, model policy wording, number two, survey of with the Canada, which is what we've been talking about. And I agree with her comment completely.
Thank you. Did you want to identify? Yes. Did you want to identify your name?
Yes, I'm Julie Allen. That was from Michelle Whitting.
Okay. All right. So okay, got it. That's also in the chat under Kurt Whitting. Thank you for your question. So you're wondering how we're incorporating deadly force mandates into the work that we're doing. That's a good question. And welcome any other member of the public. I don't see anyone else on video. And I invite people to also put their question into the chat or their comment into the chat. Okay. Well, I think we've heard from all members of the public. I'll invite the board to speak again if anything from the public has prompted thoughts that you want to share. No? Okay. Members of DOJ, are there any comments that you want to provide, having heard public comment? Nope. Okay. All right. These are great.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
this is Alex. And Nancy included it in the chat, but I just wanted to make sure for those who were on the phone that the DOJ issued a AB 392 law enforcement bulletin just last week on May 22nd. So that is available now. So I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think more broadly to your question, Julia, and the Wittig family, the RIPA board has been trying to think, as a full board, we've been trying to think holistically about all of these issues. As a policy subcommittee, we've been trying to think specifically about the policies that are in place in law enforcement agencies, providing model language, encouraging people to adopt that model language. And now our conversation today has been to survey and understand whether agencies are in fact adopting model language what they're putting into practice, how they're using data, and the deeper questions that we're trying to get at are around accountability. So thank you, members of the public, for your questions. I think we are at next steps, and I will just summarize what I have heard and invite board members to help me understand next steps. But I understand next steps to be one, that Dominique will follow up with law enforcement agencies directly on the questions of specifically supervisory review, accountability, and I would add, because it was just mentioned in public comment, also the data analysis piece. On all of those big X's where we're getting a lot of X's in the review that you provided, it would be good to get more detail, more information about that. So that was one. Two, that DOJ will be putting together a survey, and at our recommendation, they will add a question, a pointed question, meaningful question around accountability, and to the extent that it's practical, going deeper on supervisory review. Three, that we will all give consideration to content for the report. We've talked about a few things here in our meeting, and I would encourage us, and this might be a question for the full board, but I would encourage us to hold space for this moment around pandemic response and provide some thoughts on law enforcement activity in this moment, and sure what that could or should look like, and how general it should be, given that this is one pandemic, but we may have others. We have had others. So that would be my thought. Are there other things or any corrections to those next step pieces that the board wants to offer? No, does that sound right? Sahar, give me some feedback. Is that sounding right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Oscar, what do you think? Okay. Melanie? Yeah, okay. And then we have some folks on the phone. We have LaWanda, and Tim, and Commissioner Stanley, Dave Robinson. Does that sound like a good summary of what next step should be?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Great.
Sounds good to me, LaWanda. LaWanda sounds good to me.
Great. Tim, you still there? I know you're thinking of us wherever you are. Okay, great. Well, DOJ, is there anything else we need to cover? Or can we adjourn?
I think that's it from everyone. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for everyone, putting up with this online virtual platform. And as we do these, I'm sure we'll all get a little more used to this. But thanks to everyone for meeting virtually with us and continuing all of your hard work.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.